The first time Mrs. Callahan invited us to dinner, my little brother licked the stew from his bowl and whispered, "It tastes just like Daddy." It was the summer of 1997 when Mrs. Callahan moved into the peeling white house at the end of our street. She came alone, dragging behind her a U-Haul that looked too big for a woman so thin. The neighborhood kids whispered that she used to be a nurse at the county hospital, the kind who worked the night shift and never smiled at children. I was 12 that summer, old enough to sense when something wasn't right, but still young enough to follow my mother when she said, "Go on, be polite, she's our neighbor now." Mrs. Callahan had sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to scan every part of you before you spoke. She wore gloves, even in July, claiming the sun gave her rashes. 3 days after she moved in, she came to our door with a smile that stretched too wide. "I've made stew," she said, holding out a steaming pot covered with a cloth. "Enough for all of you." The smell was rich, heavy, meaty in a way that made my stomach twist. My mother thanked her and set the pot on the counter. We ate that night around the table, my parents, my little brother Tommy, and me. It was the best stew I'd ever had. Thick chunks of meat that melted in your mouth, a flavor so deep it made every beef stew I'd ever tasted seem fake. My father asked where she bought her meat. My mother asked for the recipe. Mrs. Callahan just smiled and said, "It's a family secret." Tommy, spooning up the last of his bowl, said the words that froze my blood. "It tastes just like Daddy." The table fell silent. My father chuckled awkwardly, but I saw my mother's hand tremble on her spoon. Mrs. Callahan just watched us eat, her eyes glinting, as if she had been waiting for that exact moment. The week after our first dinner with Mrs. Callahan, something strange happened. Mrs. Green, the old woman who lived across the street, went missing. Her little poodle barked for 2 days straight, tied to the porch railing, until animal control came to collect it. The neighbors muttered about her wandering mind, saying she must have walked off and forgotten her way home. But I had seen her the night before, out in her garden, waving at me while trimming her roses. 2 days later, Mrs. Callahan knocked on our door again. "I've made too much," she said, handing over another covered pot. This time, the meat was darker, tougher. My mother wrinkled her brow as she chewed, but my father devoured it, praising the seasoning. That night, when I lay awake in bed, I heard something from outside. The Callahan house, dark except for one yellow glow in the kitchen, had its back door wide open. A figure, small, hunched, was dragging something heavy across the yard. The sound of it scraping against the grass stayed in my head long after the kitchen lights snapped off. By the end of the month, 3 more neighbors were gone. Mr. Hawkins, the postman who always whistled, teenage twins from 2 blocks over, last seen riding their bikes, and then Officer Martinez, the cop who lived near the elementary school. No one seemed to connect it, but the pattern was there. Each time a neighbor went missing, Mrs. Callahan arrived at our door with another pot of stew, smiling that too wide smile. My mother began refusing it. She claimed she didn't trust food she hadn't cooked herself. But my father grew irritated, saying it was rude to decline. He accepted every pot, sometimes sneaking bowls late at night when he thought no one was watching. Tommy, meanwhile, adored the meals. He ate like he had never tasted real food before. One night, he whispered to me, "She's nice. She says she reminds her of her own son." I froze. "What son?" I asked. He shrugged. "The one who went missing." I wanted to tell my mother right then, but I didn't. Because when I looked out my window again that night, I saw Tommy standing in Mrs. Callahan's backyard, talking to her in the dark. And she was holding a butcher's knife. The next morning, I confronted Tommy. "What were you doing in her yard?" I whispered before breakfast. My parents were in the kitchen, laughing over coffee as if nothing in the world was wrong. Tommy rubbed sleep from his eyes. "She wanted to show me her garden. She said she grows her own herbs." "Herbs don't need knives that big." He frowned, confused, but didn't argue. Instead, he leaned closer. "She said if I wanted, she'd teach me her secret recipe." A chill wrapped around me. That afternoon, while my parents argued about bills, I sneaked to the Callahan house. Her curtains were drawn, but the front door creaked open when I tried the handle. The air inside was damp and smelled of iron and rot, masked with heavy spices. The living room looked normal enough, doilies on the chairs, family photos on the wall, but when I glanced closer, I noticed all the pictures had faces scratched out. Men, women, even children. Every face was gouged until only pale ovals remained. I nearly bolted, but something pulled me deeper. I found myself in the kitchen. The counters gleamed with polished knives, rows of glass jars filled with dried leaves, powders, and something else I couldn't name. Something too dark, too clotted to be any kind of spice. Then I saw it. A leather-bound book, open on the counter. The pages were stained, smudged with something brown. Inside were handwritten recipes, stews, roasts, pies. Each recipe had a name scribbled at the top. Hawkins, Green, Martinez. My stomach lurched. The back door creaked, and I ducked into the pantry just as Mrs. Callahan walked in. She hummed to herself, carrying something wrapped in a blood-stained sheet. She set it on the counter and unwrapped it. I bit my fist to keep from screaming. It was a hand, pale, stiff, fingers curled as if still reaching for something. Mrs. Callahan picked up her knife and, with a practiced motion, began slicing. Shoulder meat's always the sweetest, but children are tender all over. I ran before she could hear me, stumbling back into the street, gasping for air. That night, I told my parents everything. My mother paled, clutching Tommy close, but my father only narrowed his eyes and asked, "Did you see what spices she used?" When I finished telling them what I saw in Mrs. Callahan's kitchen, silence sat heavy over our dining table. My mother's hands trembled on the tablecloth. "We have to call the police," she whispered, "now, but before she touches another child." But my father just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, lips tight. His eyes weren't filled with fear. They were filled with calculation. "You're exaggerating," he said flatly. "You didn't see what you think you saw." "I saw a hand, Dad. A hand on her counter." "You saw meat," his voice sharpened. "That's all it was. You've been watching too many scary movies." My mother slammed her palm against the table. "Meat doesn't have fingernails, Richard." The sound startled Tommy, who clutched her arm. He looked torn, his little face caught between confusion and loyalty. But it tastes good," he whispered, as though that was defense enough. My mother pulled him close. "Don't you ever eat from her again. Do you hear me? Not a bite." My father stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know what you're saying. That woman is kind, generous. She's been feeding this neighborhood since she got here." He turned his gaze on me. sharp and accusing. And you're trying to ruin it because you don't like her. I couldn't believe it. His voice had a strange hunger in it, like the stew itself had poisoned his judgment. Mom wouldn't let it go. Richard, listen to yourself. People are missing. Don't you see? She's feeding us our neighbors. My father's lips curled into something like a smile, but there was no warmth in it. And hasn't it been the best meal you've ever had? The room froze. Tommy whimpered. My mother pulled him tighter, and I realized then it wasn't just Mrs. Callahan we had to fear. Something had already taken root in my father. That night, I overheard him on the phone in the garage. I pressed my ear to the door. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Yes," he whispered. "I'll keep him calm. Just keep cooking for us. Please, don't stop." I barely slept that night. Every sound from the garage gnawing at my ears. At dawn, I crept out of bed and pressed my eye to the crack in the garage door. My father was at his workbench, the glow of a single bulb above him. On the table sat a cutting board, and on it, strips of flesh, red and raw, neatly stacked like butcher's cuts. He was seasoning them, carefully, lovingly. His fingers trembled as he sprinkled salt, rubbed in herbs, massaged oil into the tissue. He lifted a piece to his mouth and bit into it, chewing with a look of shameful pleasure. I stumbled back, hand over my mouth, bile burning my throat. Later, at breakfast, he acted as though nothing was wrong. Eggs, toast, coffee. He smiled at Tommy, ruffled his hair, even kissed my mother on the cheek. But when his gaze landed on me, I saw it. The glint of warning. He knew I had seen. That evening, while Mom folded laundry in her room, I found the courage to check his desk drawer. Beneath unpaid bills and loose screws, I found a small notebook. My father's handwriting filled the pages. Not numbers, not work notes. Recipes. Green, thigh, tougher than expected, good in stew. Hawkins, ribs, fatty, excellent smoked. Martinez, liver strong, needed more garlic. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. He wasn't just eating her food, he was cataloging it, memorizing it. I flipped to the last page. My heart stopped. Tommy, tender, perfect age, save for roast. I dropped the notebook as though it had burned me. Every shadow in the house felt alive, every creak of the floor like a footstep drawing closer. When I finally dared to look up, he was standing in the doorway, watching me. "You shouldn't snoop," he said softly. Too softly. His smile stretched across his face, calm but dangerous. "Do you want me to tell you her secret? Do you want to know why it tastes so good?" I bolted from the room, the echo of his laughter following me down the hall. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if Mrs. Callahan was the worst monster on our street. Over the next week, my father changed. He stopped going to work. His eyes, once sharp and practical, grew sunken, glassy, as if something inside him was hollowing out. He prowled the house at night, opening cupboards, sniffing the air, searching for something only he could smell. My mother begged him to see a doctor, but he only sneered. "I don't need a doctor. I need a real meal." The fights grew worse. One night, I heard a crash and found him shoving my mother against the wall, snarling that she'd thrown away his food. She was crying, holding a garbage bag that reeked of spoiled meat. He noticed me then, frozen in the doorway. His face shifted, softening into something almost apologetic. "Go to bed. This is grown-up business." But the hunger in his eyes never left. 2 nights later, he left the house and didn't come back until dawn. I peeked from my window and saw him stumbling across the lawn, clothes smeared with dark stains. His hands shook as he carried a bundle wrapped in plastic. He buried it in the shed. When I asked about it, he leaned close, so close I could smell the copper on his breath. "You think she's the only one who knows how to carve?" he whispered. My stomach turned. "Dad, what are you doing?" His smile spread wide, teeth red at the corners. "Becoming part of the family." From that moment, I couldn't tell who was more dangerous, the neighbor who fed us or the father who now craved her lessons. And the worst part, Tommy was starting to follow him. I caught my brothers sneaking out one night, trailing behind Dad toward Mrs. Callahan's porch. My brother's small hand slipped into hers, and she bent down, whispering something into his ear that made him giggle. The door closed behind them, and I was left in the dark with the terrifying truth. If I didn't stop them soon, I wouldn't just lose my father, I'd lose my little brother, too. It was nearly midnight when I heard it, metal scraping against metal, followed by a low, wet thump. The sounds weren't coming from our house this time. They were coming from next door. I slipped out of bed, crept to the window, and pulled the curtain just enough to see. Mrs. Callahan's kitchen light glowed dim, a sickly yellow, casting long shadows against the walls. And there, through the half-open curtains, I saw my father. He stood beside her, apron tied around his waist, sleeves rolled up, a cleaver heavy in his hand. His posture was stiff, nervous, but Mrs. Callahan hovered close, her gloved hand guiding his wrist like a teacher correcting a student. On the table before them lay a shape wrapped in butcher's paper, too large to be an animal, the sheet soaked through with dark blotches, sticky and glistening. Mrs. Callahan leaned close, whispering something I couldn't hear. My father nodded, raised the cleaver, and brought it down. The sound was sharp, final. He flinched, then looked down at what he had done. Slowly, his face transformed, not into horror, but into awe. He set the cleaver aside and touched the flesh with his bare hands, almost tenderly. Mrs. Callahan clapped once, delighted, like a proud mother. She whispered again, and this time I could almost make it out. "See, it's not killing, it's preparing, it's giving." My father nodded eagerly, sweat shining on his forehead. Then, to my horror, he bent down and bit into the raw meat, tearing away a strip with his teeth. His body shuddered, eyes fluttering shut, as if he had tasted heaven itself. Mrs. Callahan smiled and stroked his hair like he was a child. From the shadows, another figure appeared, Tommy. He stood there, barefoot, sleepy-eyed, clutching his stuffed bear. He watched our father chew, his small lips parting in fascination. Mrs. Callahan crouched beside him, cupping his chin gently. "Would you like a taste, sweetheart?" Tommy hesitated, then nodded. And I
I couldn't breathe because in that moment, I realized I wasn't watching my father fall anymore. I was watching him belong.
I couldn't look away. My father chewed slowly, savoring, while Mrs. Callahan guided Tommy closer to the table. The butcher paper shifted as she pulled it open wider. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just meat. It was a body. The head was missing, but the rest was intact enough for me to recognize the pale skin, the sagging arms, the faded blue floral dress. My breath hitched. Mrs. Green, the sweet old woman who used to slip me peppermints every Halloween. Her hand, gnarled with arthritis, fingernails painted pink, still wore her wedding ring. My father picked it up, examined the fingers as though appraising cuts of pork. Then he sliced through the wrist with the cleaver, laying the hand aside. "Too tough," he muttered. Mrs. Callahan laughed lightly, her voice almost musical. "You'll learn. Everybody has its favorite part." Tommy's eyes widened, not in fear, but in wonder. He pointed at the shoulder. "That part," he whispered. "That's the tender one, right?" She smiled at him, beaming like a grandmother teaching a child to bake cookies. "Oh, very good. You'll make a fine cook one day." My father kissed the top of Tommy's head, pride gleaming in his eyes. "That's my boy." My knees buckled beneath me, and I staggered away from the window. My heart slammed so hard I thought it might give me away, draw their eyes to the glass. But I knew the truth now. This wasn't just Mrs. Callahan's doing. She hadn't corrupted him against his will. My father was choosing this. He was butchering neighbors, tasting their flesh, and now he was letting Tommy learn. And if I didn't stop it, Tommy wouldn't just watch. He would become them. By September, the missing were impossible to ignore. The news vans started parking at the end of our street, cameras rolling as reporters spoke in hushed, serious tones. Neighbors huddled on porches, whispering about disappearances like they were sudden storms. Unpredictable, tragic, but never quite touching their own roof. Posters went up on telephone poles. The Hawkins twins, Officer Martinez, Mrs. Green, each face smiling, frozen in time. Each set of eyes watching me whenever I walked past. At school, kids traded rumors. A serial killer, one said. Organ harvesters, said another. Some swore it was cults. Others pointed at the woods. But no one pointed at the peeling white house at the end of the street. No one looked at Mrs. Callahan when she walked past with her grocery bags, her smile wide, her gloves spotless. Except me. I saw the stains she couldn't scrub out from under her nails. I saw how her eyes lingered on children, not with warmth, but with hunger. And I saw my father. He was different now, even in public. His skin grew ashen, his clothes loose on him, but his gaze was sharp, feverish. When the neighbors gathered to share theories, he was the loudest voice insisting that everyone was overreacting. People leave all the time, he said. Maybe they wanted to disappear. Not everything's a crime. But then he'd glance at Mrs. Callahan, and she'd nod ever so slightly. And I knew they were covering for each other. One night, the sheriff himself knocked on our door. He asked questions, polite at first, then sharper. My mother's hands shook as she swore we hadn't seen anything unusual. I wanted to scream the truth, but my father stood close by, his hand heavy on my shoulder, squeezing hard enough to bruise. After the sheriff left, Dad turned to me. His smile was thin, dangerous. "You keep your mouth shut," he said.
This family survives together. But there was nothing together about it. He wasn't protecting us. He was protecting her. And when I peeked through the curtains that night, I saw townsfolk standing in knots, whispering, watching. The neighborhood was waking up. They didn't have proof yet, but suspicion was spreading like wildfire. It was only a matter of time before the town stopped whispering and started looking. And if they looked too close, they'd see what I had seen. The tension in town snapped on a Friday night. The sheriff's car pulled up outside Mrs. Callahan's house. Neighbors crowded the street, whispering, some clutching candles, others clutching weapons. For weeks, the disappearances had been quiet gossip, but now suspicion had a face, a target. Inside our house, my father paced like a caged animal. His shirt was stained, his eyes wild. "They're coming for her," he hissed. "They'll ruin everything." "Everything?" your mother spat. "She's killing people, Richard, feeding us our neighbors." He rounded on her, his voice rising. "And don't you love it? Don't you love how alive you felt? Don't you remember the taste? Don't lie to me, Margaret. Don't you dare." Her face crumbled in disgust, but she didn't answer. Then there was a knock on the back door. Sharp. Urgent. Mrs. Callahan. She slipped inside like smoke, her gloved hands folded neatly, her smile steady despite the chaos outside. "It's time," she said softly. "The town won't wait much longer. We'll give them a feast they'll never forget." She laid a basket on the table. Inside were cuts of meat, pink and glistening, still steaming. My stomach lurched as I spotted the tiny hand, the fingernails painted with glitter polish. One of the Hawkins twins. Tommy gasped in awe. "For us?" She bent down, cupping his cheek. "For you, sweetheart, for the future." My father's eyes shone with feverish devotion. "Tell me what to do." She handed him the cleaver. "You'll carve, I'll serve. Tonight, they'll all taste. And once they taste, they'll never turn back." I couldn't take it anymore. "No!" I screamed, slamming my hand on the table. "You're monsters, both of you." The room froze. My father turned to me, eyes burning, the cleaver heavy in his grip. For a moment, I thought he'd strike me, but instead he smiled. "You don't understand yet, but you will. Tonight you'll eat too. We'll all eat together." Outside, the crowd was growing louder, torches and flashlights cutting through the dark. The sheriff's voice boomed, demanding Mrs. Callahan come out. Inside, the table was set. The meat steamed. The knives gleamed. And I realized then that it wasn't just about feeding us. It was about feeding everyone, the whole town.
Weeks later, the street looked normal again. Lawns were mowed, curtains were drawn, and neighbors waved as if nothing had happened. The news never mentioned the disappearances. The sheriff had quietly moved the investigation along, chalking it up to people relocating or accidents. Inside our house, everything smelled faintly of garlic and herbs. My mother barely spoke. She didn't leave the house anymore, didn't look me in the eye. My father, however, sat at the kitchen table every evening, waiting for the next pot, the next taste. His eyes gleamed like a predator's in the dim light. Tommy, now taller, more confident, walked behind him as he once did behind Mrs. Callahan. Sometimes I caught him humming that same soft tune she used to sing while slicing meat. Mrs. Callahan visited often,
bringing baskets wrapped in white cloth, always smiling, always patient. And every time she left, my father's eyes followed her, full of reverence, full of hunger. I tried to speak up once, to warn the neighbors, to tell them what really happened, but my father's hands closed around mine with surprising strength. "Be careful," he said, voice low. "The world outside doesn't understand. They never will. But here, we know the truth."
And the truth was simple, terrifying, and absolute. We were no longer a family. We were apprentices, students, participants. And the feast? The feast would never end. From the corner of the kitchen, I glimpsed Tommy stirring a pot, and I knew that one day he would carve with the same devotion I had seen in my father. Mrs. Callahan's eyes glimmered through the window that night. She waved, and in her smile was the promise that the street, the town, and perhaps the whole world might one day join the table.